Welcome to the Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you like this story. Let's begin. The acrid smell of motor oil and the metallic clang of tools against engine parts filled the air as I wiped my grease-stained hands on an old rag. It was another late night at the shop, but I didn't mind. There's something satisfying about fixing what's broken, about making things work again. If only relationships were as straightforward as engines. I'm Henry Calloway, owner of Calloway's Auto Repair. It's not much, this little shop in our quiet suburban town, but it's mine. I've poured my heart and soul into it for years, building it from the ground up with nothing but my own 2 hands and an unshakable work ethic. Some might call it modest, but to me, it's a testament to what a man can achieve through honest, hard work. As I locked up the shop, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Laura, my wife of 10 years. Though lately it felt like we were strangers sharing a house rather than partners sharing a life. I sighed, bracing myself for whatever awaited me at home. The house was quiet when I walked in, save for the click-clack of Laura's fingers on her phone. She barely looked up as I entered, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. "You're late," she said, her tone flat and disinterested. "Had to finish up Mrs. Johnson's transmission," I replied, hanging up my jacket. "You know how it is." Laura's eyes flicked up to meet mine, a hint of resentment in their depths. "Do I? It seems like I know less and less about your life these days, Henry." I bit back a retort. It wasn't worth the fight, not when I was bone-tired and could feel a headache brewing behind my eyes. Instead, I headed for the kitchen, intent on scrounging up some dinner. "I'm going out tomorrow night," Laura called from the living room. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement, delivered with the kind of casual disregard that had become all too familiar lately. I paused, my hand on the refrigerator door. "Tomorrow? But it's my day off. I thought we could spend some time together." Laura appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. "It's Melissa's birthday party. From work. I already told her I'd be there. Can't you reschedule? We haven't had a night together in weeks." Her laugh was sharp, humorless. "Reschedule a birthday party? Don't be ridiculous, Henry. Besides, I'm a free woman. I can do whatever I want." The words hit me like a physical blow. A free woman, as if our marriage, our vows, meant nothing. I turned away, unable to look at her. "Fine, go to your party." I heard her huff of annoyance, followed by the sound of her retreating footsteps. As I stood there in the quiet kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. The Laura I married would never have spoken to me like that, would never have dismissed my feelings so callously. But then again, maybe I didn't know this Laura at all. The next evening, I watched from the window as Laura climbed into her car, dressed to the nines in an outfit that seemed a bit too revealing for a simple work party. She didn't look back as she drove away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of unease. I tried to distract myself with TV, with a book, even with some paperwork from the shop. But my mind kept circling back to Laura, to the changes I'd noticed in her behavior lately. The longer hours at work, the constant messages on her phone, the growing distance between us. I brushed it all off as work stress, not wanting to believe there could be another explanation. But now, as the hours ticked by and Laura still hadn't returned, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt any longer. It was well past midnight when I heard the front door open, followed by the unsteady click of high heels on hardwood. I rose from the couch, steeling myself for whatever I was about to face. Laura stumbled into the living room, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. The scent of alcohol and unfamiliar cologne clung to her like a second skin, but it was the marks on her neck that stopped me cold. Angry red love bites, stark against her pale skin. "Have a good time?" I asked, my voice deceptively calm. She blinked at me, swaying slightly on her feet. Then, to my disbelief, she laughed. "Oh, Henry, you should have been there. It was freeing." I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on the damning evidence of her infidelity. "I can see that. Care to explain those? Laura's hand flew to her neck, a flicker of panic crossing her face before it was replaced by defiance. I told you, Henry. I'm a free woman. You don't own me. In that moment, something inside me hardened. The last shred of doubt, of hope that there might be an innocent explanation, withered and died. I watched in silence as Laura stumbled to the couch, passing out almost as soon as her head hit the cushion. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my chair, watching the rise and fall of Laura's chest, my mind racing. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the windows, I had made my decision. I was in the kitchen when Laura finally stirred, nursing a cup of coffee as I heard her groan of pain. Good. I hoped her head was pounding, hoped she felt even a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. Henry, she called, her voice rough. Can you bring me some water? I walked into the living room, but instead of water, I carried a stack of papers. Laura squinted up at me. Confusion etched across her features. What's that? Divorce papers, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. I think it's time we stop pretending, don't you? Laura's eyes widened, shock replacing the hangover-induced haze. Divorce? Henry, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you came home last night covered in another man's marks. I'm talking about the lies, the late nights, the distance between us. I'm talking about you throwing away 10 years of marriage for a night of freedom. She sat up, wincing at the sudden movement. Henry, please. It was just a mistake. We can work through this. But I was already shaking my head. No, Laura. We can't. You made your choice last night. Now it's time for me to make mine. I placed the papers on the coffee table in front of her. My decision as irrevocable as the ink on the page. I'll be staying with a friend for a few days. I suggest you use that time to find somewhere else to live. As I turned to leave, Laura's voice stopped me. You can't do this, Henry. You have no idea what you're throwing away. I looked back at her, taking in the smeared makeup, the tangled hair, the desperation in her eyes. In that moment, I realized that the woman I had loved, the woman I had married, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone I no longer recognized or wanted in my life. No, Laura, I said, my voice soft but firm. I know exactly what I'm throwing away, and I know exactly what I'm gaining, my self-respect. With that, I walked out the door, leaving behind the shattered remains of my marriage and 10 years of memories. It hurt. God, how it hurt. But as I climbed into my truck, I felt something else beneath the pain, a sense of resolve, of determination. Laura had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine, and I chose to be strong, to be unforgiving, to be the kind of man who wouldn't let betrayal define him, but instead use it as fuel to forge a better, stronger version of himself. The road ahead would be difficult. I had no illusions about that. But I was Henry Calloway, and I had built something from nothing before. I could do it again. As I drove away from the house that was no longer a home, I made a silent vow. I would not just survive this betrayal. I would thrive in spite of it, and I would make damn sure that Laura regretted the day she ever thought she could discard me so easily. The next few days passed in a blur of anger and pain, punctuated by moments of cold, clear determination. I threw myself into my work at the shop, finding solace in the simplicity of engines and the honesty of manual labor. Cars, unlike people, didn't lie. They didn't betray you. If something was wrong, you could diagnose it, fix it, and move on. If only relationships were that straightforward. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the call came. I was elbow deep in Mrs. Robinson's old Chevy when my phone rang. The caller ID flashed an unfamiliar number, but something told me to answer it. Mr. Calloway? A crisp, professional voice came through the line. This is Caroline Blackwood from the law offices of Blackwood and Associates. I'm calling on behalf of your wife, Laura Calloway. I felt my jaw clench, my free hand curling into a fist. Of course. I should have known Laura wouldn't go quietly. Ex-wife. I corrected, my voice hard. What can I do for you, Miss Blackwood? There was a pause then. Mr. Calloway, I've been retained by Mrs. Calloway to handle her divorce proceedings. She's asserting her right to half of all marital assets, including your auto repair shop. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The shop, my livelihood, my passion, the thing I built from the ground up with nothing but my own 2 hands and an unshakable work ethic. And Laura wanted to take half of it. Mr. Calloway, are you still there? I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain steady. I'm here, and you can tell Laura that she'll get my shop over my dead body. I hung up before Miss Blackwood could respond, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was war. And if Laura wanted to play dirty, well, 2 could play at that game. I closed up the shop early that day, driving across town to a small, nondescript office building. The nameplate on the door read Malcolm Brooks, attorney at law. Malcolm and I went way back, all the way to high school. He'd gone on to become a lawyer, while I pursued my passion for cars, but we'd kept in touch over the years. Malcolm looked up as I entered his office, his eyebrows rising at my unannounced visit. Henry, what brings you here? I collapsed into the chair across from his desk, feeling the weight of the past few days settle onto my shoulders. I need your help. Laura's trying to take everything. Malcolm's expression hardened as I filled him in on the situation. By the time I finished, he was already pulling out a legal pad, his pen flying across the paper. All right, Henry, here's what we're going to do, he said, his voice taking on the sharp, focused tone I remember from our high school debate team days. First things first, we need to gather evidence. Laura's claiming half your assets. We need to prove she doesn't deserve them. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. She's been having an affair. I'm sure of it. If I can prove it. Malcolm's eyes glinted. That would certainly help our case. But we need more than just suspicion, Henry. We need hard evidence. As I left Malcolm's office that evening, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Laura thought she could walk all over me. Take what was rightfully mine. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. By day, I ran the shop, putting on a brave face for my customers and employees. But by night, I transformed into a different person entirely. A detective, an investigator, a man on a mission. I dug through old phone records, credit card statements, anything that might give me a clue about Laura's activities. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture began to come together. Her lover's name was Derek Mitchell, a paramedic at the same hospital where Laura worked as a nurse. I found their text messages, hundreds of them, filled with flowery declarations of love and explicit details that turned my stomach. I discovered receipts for hotel rooms, for expensive gifts that I knew I hadn't bought her, but it was the video that sealed the deal. Grainy footage from a security camera outside a local motel, showing Laura and Derek locked in a passionate embrace. The timestamp on the video coincided with a night Laura had told me she was working a double shift at the hospital. As I stared at the frozen image on my computer screen, I felt something inside me harden even further. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a systematic dismantling of our entire life together, a web of lies so intricate it made my head spin. But I wasn't done yet. Something about this whole situation still didn't sit right with me. Derek Mitchell. There was more to his story. I was sure of it. I reached out to a friend of a friend, a private investigator named Lisa Mendez. I need everything you can find on this guy, I told her, sliding Derek's information across the table at our clandestine meeting in a dimly lit bar. Lisa raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Everything, huh? This personal or business? I met her gaze steadily. Both. She nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. All right, Henry, give me a week. I'll see what I can dig up. True to her word, Lisa delivered a thick file to my shop exactly 7 days later. As I pored over its contents, I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Derek Mitchell was no knight in shining armor. He was a con artist, a manipulator who had a history of seducing vulnerable women and bleeding them dry financially. And now, he had set his sights on Laura. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the coldness in her eyes as she told me she was a free woman. The casual way she discarded our years together. No! Laura had made her bed. Now she could lie in it. Armed with this new information, I met with Malcolm again. His eyes widened as he looked through the file, a low whistle escaping his lips. "This is gold, Henry," he said, looking up at me with newfound respect. "With this, we can not only protect your assets, but potentially go after Laura for damages. She's not just cheating on you. She's actively conspiring with this Derek character to defraud you." I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "Good. I want her to feel every bit of pain she's inflicted on me, Malcolm. I want her to understand exactly what she's thrown away." As I left Malcolm's office that day, I felt a shift in the air. The tables had turned. Laura thought she held all the cards, but little did she know, I was about to show her a royal flush. The game was on, and I intended to win, not just for myself, but for every person who had ever been betrayed, who had ever been made to feel like they weren't enough. Laura and Derek were about to learn a very painful lesson. Never underestimate a man with nothing left to lose. The autumn chill had settled into the bones of our small town, leaves crunching underfoot as I made my way to the shop each morning. But the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice that had formed around my heart. Every day brought new revelations, each one stoking the fire of my determination. Laura, it seemed, had been busy, not content with just Derek. She'd been spinning a web of lies that threatened to entangle me completely. I sat in my office at the back of the shop, poring over the latest report from Lisa. The private investigator had outdone herself, digging up dirt on Derek that made my skin crawl. "You seeing this, Henry?" Malcolm's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "This guy's got a record a mile long. Fraud, embezzlement, even a domestic violence charge that got dropped." I leaned back in my chair, a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Oh, I'm seeing it all right." And Laura's tied herself to the scumbag. Malcolm's sigh was heavy with concern. "Henry, man, I gotta ask, are you sure you want to go through with this? It's not too late to just walk away. Let the lawyers handle it." For a moment, I considered it. Wouldn't it be easier to just wash my hands of the whole mess? To let Laura and Derek have each other? To start fresh somewhere new? But then I remembered the look in Laura's eyes that night she came home, reeking of alcohol and another man's cologne. The casual cruelty in her voice as she declared herself a free woman. "No," I said, my voice hard with resolve. "No, Malcolm. I'm seeing this through to the end. They want to play dirty? I'll show them dirty." I could almost hear Malcolm's nod of understanding. "All right, Henry. If that's what you want, I'm with you. But we've got to be smart about this. One wrong move, and we could lose everything." "I know," I replied, my mind already racing with possibilities. "That's why I need your help, Mal. We're going to set a trap, and when the time is right, we're going to spring it." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my plan with the same meticulous attention to detail that I applied to rebuilding engines. Every move was calculated, every action deliberate. I started by reaching out to some old contacts in town. It's amazing what people will tell you when you've known them for years, when you fixed their cars and kept their secrets. Bit by bit, I pieced together a clearer picture of Derek's life in our town. What I found made my blood boil. Derek wasn't just a cheater and a con man. He was a gambler, and a bad one at that. He owed money to some dangerous people, the kind of folks you didn't want to cross. It was Lisa who brought me the final piece of the puzzle. She showed up at the shop one evening, long after closing time. "You're not going to like this, Henry," she said, sliding a folder across my desk. I flipped it open, my eyes widening as I took in the contents. Bank statements, credit card bills, all in Laura's name. But the transactions, they were for things I knew we'd never bought. Expensive watches, high-end electronics, even a down payment on a sports car. She's been siphoning money from your joint account, Lisa explained, her voice soft with sympathy. Looks like she and Derek have been living it up on your dime. I should have felt angry. I should have felt betrayed all over again. But instead, a cold, calm clarity washed over me. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. Thank you, Lisa, I said, my voice steady. You've just handed me the key to destroying them both. She raised an eyebrow, a hint of concern in her eyes. Henry, what are you planning? I met her gaze, allowing a small smile to play at the corners of my mouth. Nothing illegal, if that's what you're worried about. I'm just going to make sure they reap what they've sown. As Lisa left, I picked up my phone and dialed Malcolm's number. Mal, it's time. We're going to need to move fast. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Malcolm and I worked tirelessly, preparing legal documents, gathering evidence, setting everything in place for the moment when we'd spring our trap. I kept tabs on Laura and Derek through Lisa's reports. They were getting bolder, more reckless. Derek was pressuring Laura to file false claims of emotional abuse, thinking it would give her an edge in the divorce proceedings. Little did they know, they were playing right into my hands. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I put the final piece of my plan into motion. I stood outside my shop, watching as a nondescript van pulled up. The man who stepped out was not someone you'd look at twice on the street, which was exactly why I'd chosen him. Mr. Calloway? He asked, extending his hand. I'm Jake from Secure Tech. You called about installing some new security cameras. I nodded, shaking his hand firmly. That's right. Let's get started, shall we? As Jake and his team worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building. These weren't just any security cameras. They were the eyes and ears of my revenge, strategically placed to catch every damning word and action. By the time they finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I stood in my office, watching the feeds from the new cameras flicker to life on my computer screen. Now, all I had to do was wait. I didn't have to wait long. The very next evening, as I was closing up shop, I saw them, Laura and Derek, sneaking into the alley behind the shop, thinking they were hidden from view. I watched on the camera feed as they argued in hushed, angry whispers. Derek was agitated, pacing back and forth, while Laura tried to calm him down. We need more money, Derek hissed, his face contorted with desperation. Those guys I owe, they're not going to wait much longer. Laura's voice was pleading. I'm trying, Derek, but Henry's lawyer is blocking every move we make. We need to be patient. Derek's laugh was harsh, humorless. Patient? You don't know these people, Laura. They don't do patient. If we don't come up with the cash soon, he left the threat hanging, but I could see the fear in Laura's eyes. Good. Let her feel afraid. Let her understand the consequences of her actions. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. This was better than I could have hoped for. Not only did I have proof of their affair, but now I had evidence of their financial schemes, their desperation. I picked up my phone, dialing Malcolm's number without taking my eyes off the screen. Mal, it's Henry. You're going to want to see this. I think it's time we make our move. As I hung up, I felt a sense of satisfaction settle over me. Laura and Derek thought they were so clever, so untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. The trap was set, and when it sprung, it would destroy them both. The courthouse loomed before me, a monument to justice that I hoped would finally be served. I straightened my tie, a gesture more for my own comfort than appearance. Today was the day Laura would learn that her actions had consequences. As I walked up the steps, Malcolm fell into step beside me. Ready for this, Henry? I nodded, my jaw set. More than ready. It's time Laura and Derek faced the music. The courtroom was a battlefield, and Laura's lawyer was the first to draw blood. He painted a picture of me as a neglectful husband, a workaholic who drove his poor, lonely wife into the arms of another man. I sat there, stone-faced, as he spun his web of lies. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "isn't it true that you often work late, leaving your wife alone?" I leaned forward to the microphone. "Yes, I work late. I was building a business to support our family. And in doing so, did you not neglect your wife's emotional needs?" I felt a flicker of anger, quickly suppressed. I loved my wife. I provided for her. If she had needs I wasn't meeting, she never communicated them to me. Laura's lawyer smirked, thinking he had me on the ropes. But then it was Malcolm's turn. "Your Honor," Malcolm said, his voice calm and assured, "I'd like to present evidence that Mrs. Calloway's infidelity began long before any alleged neglect on my client's part." The courtroom fell silent as Malcolm presented the fruits of our investigation: phone records, hotel receipts, even surveillance photos of Laura and Derek together. With each piece of evidence, I watched Laura's face grow paler, her confident smirk fading into a look of panic. But the coup de grace came when Malcolm presented the financial records. "Your Honor, these documents show that Mrs. Calloway and her paramour, Mr. Mitchell, have been systematically siphoning money from the joint account she shared with my client. They've used these funds for lavish purchases and expenses related to their affair." The judge's eyebrows shot up as he reviewed the documents. I risked a glance at Laura. She was staring at the table, her hands clenched into fists. Derek, seated behind her, looked like he wanted to bolt from the room. As we left the courtroom that day, I could feel the shift in the air. The tide had turned in my favor, and Laura knew it. Her lawyer was frantically whispering to her, no doubt trying to salvage what he could from this disaster. But I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Laura and Derek's relationship began to crumble under the pressure. Derek, once so cocky and sure of himself, now looked haunted. Every time his phone buzzed, he jumped. I knew why, of course. The anonymous tips I'd been feeding to his creditors were doing their job. The loan sharks were closing in, and Derek was running out of options. One evening, as I was closing up the shop, I saw Laura approaching. She looked different. Her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a simple blouse, her face free of makeup. For a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. But then I remembered the love bites on her neck, the cruel words she'd thrown at me, and my heart hardened once more. "Henry," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "can we talk?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Talk about what, Laura? How you tried to take everything from me. How you lied, cheated, stole." She flinched at my words. I made a mistake, Henry. I see that now. Derek, he's not who I thought he was. Can't we try to work things out?" I laughed, a harsh sound that seemed to echo in the empty parking lot. "Work things out? You must be joking. You made your choice, Laura. You said you were a free woman, remember? Well, now you get to experience the price of that freedom." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Please, Henry. I'm sorry. I'll do anything except be faithful, honest, and loyal." I cut her off. "No, Laura. We're done. You chose your path. Now you get to walk it." As she turned to leave, shoulders slumped in defeat, I called out to her. "Oh, and Laura, tell Derek I said hello. I'm sure his creditors would love to know where he is these days." The look of horror on her face as she hurried away was almost comical. Almost. I went back into the shop, a smile on my face. The trap was closing, and soon, very soon, Laura and Derek would learn the true cost of crossing Henry Calloway. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I threw myself into my work at the shop, finding solace in the simplicity of engines and the honest sweat of a hard day's labor. But even as I focused on my business, I kept one eye firmly on Laura and Derek's downward spiral. Lisa's reports came in regularly, each one more satisfying than the last. Derek's gambling debts were spiraling out of control, and the loan sharks were losing patience. Laura, her assets frozen by the ongoing divorce proceedings, was powerless to help him. It was a crisp autumn evening when the confrontation I'd been waiting for finally came. I was alone in the shop, finishing up some paperwork, when I heard the bell over the door jingle. "We're closed," I called out, not bothering to look up. "This won't take long, Calloway." I recognized Derek's voice immediately. Slowly, I raised my head to meet his gaze. He stood there, trying to look tough in his leather jacket and jeans, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Derek," I said, my voice calm and level, "what can I do for you?" He took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "You can back off. That's what. I know what you've been doing. The anonymous tips, the pressure on Laura. It stops now." I leaned back in my chair, regarding him coolly. "Or what, Derek? What exactly do you think you can do to me?" For a moment, he seemed at a loss. Then his face twisted into an ugly sneer. "I've got friends, Calloway. Friends who can make your life very difficult." I couldn't help it. I laughed. The sound seemed to catch Derek off guard, and he took a step back. "Friend," I repeated, standing up slowly. "You mean the loan sharks you owe money to? The ones who are looking for you right now?" The color drained from Derek's face. How? How do you know about that?" I walked around the desk, enjoying the way Derek tensed as I approached. "I know everything, Derek. I know about the gambling. I know about the money you and Laura stole from me. I know about the women you've conned in the past. I know it all." Derek's tough guy act crumbled before my eyes. He looked around wildly, as if seeking an escape route. "Look, Henry, we can work something out. I'll leave town. You'll never see me again." I shook my head slowly. "No, Derek, you don't get to dictate terms here. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences." As if on cue, there was a commotion outside. Derek's eyes widened in panic as he recognized the voices. His creditors had found him. "Please," he begged, his voice barely above a whisper, "don't let them find me." I looked at him. This man who had helped destroy my marriage, who had plotted to ruin me financially. For a moment, I was tempted to show mercy. But then I remembered Laura's words. "I'm a free woman, Henry. You don't own me." "You're right, Derek," I said, my voice cold. "I won't let them find you, because you're going to walk out that door and face them yourself. Like a man." The look of betrayal on Derek's face was almost comical. He opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips as the shop door burst open. 2 burly men entered, their eyes locking on Derek immediately. "There you are, you little weasel," one of them growled. I stepped back, watching impassively as they grabbed Derek by the arms. He struggled weakly, his eyes pleading with me for help. But I just stood there, silent and unmoved. As they dragged him out, I called after them, "Gentlemen, try not to make too much of a mess. I just had the parking lot repaved." The door slammed shut, leaving me alone in the silence of the shop. I could hear muffled shouts and the sound of fists hitting flesh, but I didn't move. Derek had made his bed. Now he could lie in it. The next day, I learned that Derek had been hospitalized. Broken ribs, a fractured jaw, and various other injuries. He wouldn't be smooth-talking any women for a while. Laura showed up at the shop that afternoon, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "Did you know?" she demanded. "Did you know those men were coming for Derek?" I met her gaze steadily. "I knew a lot of things, Laura. Things you should have known, too, if you weren't so blinded by your desire for freedom." She flinched at my words. "Henry, please. I need help. Derek's in the hospital. I'm about to lose everything in the divorce. I don't know what to do." For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old love I'd had for her. But then I remembered the betrayal, the lies, the theft, and my heart turned to stone once more. "You made your choice, Laura," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Now you get to live with it." As she turned to leave, shoulders slumped in defeat. I felt no joy in her misery, only a satisfaction that justice was finally being served. The trap had sprung, and Laura and Derek were caught in its jaws. Now, all that was left was to deliver the final blow. The day of the final divorce hearing dawned bright and clear. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie with steady hands. The man looking back at me was a far cry from the broken, betrayed husband of just a few months ago. His eyes were clear, his jaw set with determination. This was a man who knew his worth, who refused to be anyone's victim. Malcolm met me outside the courthouse, his briefcase bulging with the evidence we'd gathered. "Ready for this, Henry?" I nodded, a smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "More than ready, Mal. Let's finish this." The courtroom was packed. News of our contentious divorce had spread through our small town like wildfire, and it seemed everyone wanted to see the final act of this drama. Laura sat at the defendant's table, looking small and defeated. Her lawyer, once so confident and aggressive, now had the air of a man who knew he was fighting a losing battle. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it, the moment when all of our careful planning, all of the pain and betrayal, would finally pay off. Malcolm presented our case with surgical precision. He laid out the evidence of Laura's infidelity, her financial misconduct, her attempts to manipulate the court with false claims of abuse. With each new revelation, I watched Laura shrink further into herself, her face a mask of shame and regret. When it came time for the judge to make his ruling, the courtroom fell silent. I held my breath, years of my life hanging in the balance. "In light of the evidence presented," the judge began, his voice grave, "I find in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Henry Calloway. Mrs. Calloway's claims are dismissed, and she will not be entitled to any of Mr. Calloway's assets. Furthermore, Mrs. Calloway will be responsible for repaying the funds she misappropriated from their joint account." A collective gasp went up from the spectators. I sat there, barely breathing, as the judge continued. "Mr. Calloway will retain full ownership of his auto repair business, as well as the family home. Mrs. Calloway will be responsible for her own legal fees and any outstanding debts incurred during the marriage." As the judge's gavel fell, sealing his decision, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was over. I had won. Laura stumbled from the courtroom, her face ashen. I followed her out into the hallway, where she turned to face me one last time. "Henry," she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything. Is there any way at all that we could start over?" I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. In her place stood a stranger, someone I no longer recognized or wanted in my life. "No, Laura," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "The woman I loved is gone. You killed her with your lies and your betrayal. I gestured between us. This is over. For good." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, accepting the finality of my words. As she turned to leave, I called out to her one last time. "Laura, remember when you said you were a free woman? Well, now you are, completely free. Of me, of our life together, of everything we built. I hope it was worth it." I watched her walk away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. For a moment, I remembered the love bites on her neck, the cruel words she'd thrown at me, the way she'd tried to take everything I'd worked so hard for. And I knew I'd made the right choice. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt like a new man. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead forged me into someone stronger, someone who would never again allow himself to be a victim. I drove to my shop, the place that had been my sanctuary through all of this. As I stood in front of it, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment wash over me. This was mine, my creation, my legacy, and no one could take it from me. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "It's done," it read. "Laura's been blacklisted from the hospital. She won't be working as a nurse in this town again, I smiled. It was a harsh move, perhaps, but necessary. I needed to ensure that Laura and Derek could never again interfere with my life or my business. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, I saw a car pull up. It was Laura, her face tear-stained and defeated. She got out, looking around uncertainly before her eyes landed on me. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other across the expanse of asphalt. So much history between us. So much love turned to bitterness and pain. Finally, Laura spoke. "I guess this is goodbye, then." I nodded, my face impassive. "I guess it is." She hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but then thought better of it. With a final, sad look, she got back in her car and drove away. I watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner, taking with them the last remnants of our life together. As I turned back to my shop, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For now, I had a life to rebuild, a business to run, a future to create. And I would do it on my own terms, beholden to no one but myself. As I locked up the shop and headed home, I couldn't help but smile. The road ahead might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the journey. The dust had settled, but the echoes of the divorce still rang in my ears. I stood in front of my auto shop, keys in hand, ready to start another day. But this day felt different. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. The burden of a toxic marriage had been lifted from my shoulders, leaving behind a strange mix of relief and emptiness. As I unlocked the shop door, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The man who walked into this shop today was not the same one who had stood here just a few short months ago, blind to his wife's betrayal. That man was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, but also stronger. I had survived Laura's infidelity, Derek's scheming, and the brutal divorce proceedings. I had not just survived, I had won. The shop was mine, the house was mine, and most importantly, my self-respect was intact. As I flipped on the lights and the familiar smell of oil and rubber filled my nostrils, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This place, my sanctuary through the storm, would now be the foundation for my new life. The bell above the door chimed, and I turned to see Mrs. Johnson, one of my oldest customers, walk in. "Morning, Henry," she said, a hesitant smile on her face. "How are you doing?" I knew what she was really asking. News travels fast in a small town, and my divorce had been the talk of the community for weeks. "I'm doing just fine, Mrs. Johnson," I replied, surprised to find that I meant it. "What can I do for you today?" As I worked on Mrs. Johnson's car, I could feel her eyes on me, watching for any sign of the broken man she probably expected to see. But that man didn't exist anymore. With each turn of the wrench, each problem diagnosed and fixed, I felt stronger, more in control. By the time Mrs. Johnson left, her car purring like a kitten, word had spread. Henry Calloway was back in business, and he was doing just fine. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor. Cars that had seemed like impossible puzzles before now yielded their secrets easily to my focused mind. Customers who had been wary of me during the divorce proceedings now sought me out, impressed by my resilience and dedication. One evening, as I was closing up shop, I saw a familiar face approaching. It was Malcolm, my attorney and friend, who had stood by me through the worst of it. "Henry," he called out, a six-pack of beer in his hand. "Thought you might want to celebrate." I raised an eyebrow. "Celebrate what?" Malcolm grinned. "Your freedom, my friend, and the fact that you're still standing when most men would have crumbled." We sat on the hood of an old Chevy I was restoring, nursing our beers as the sun set over the town. For a while, we just sat in companionable silence, two men who had been through a war together. Finally, Malcolm spoke. "You know, Henry, I've seen a lot of divorces in my time. Nasty ones, too. But I've never seen anyone come through it like you have. Most guys, they're broken afterward. But you're stronger." I took a long pull from my beer, considering his words. "I had to be," I said finally. Laura and Derek, they thought they could break me, take everything I'd worked for. I couldn't let that happen. Malcolm nodded, understanding in his eyes. And you didn't. You beat them at their own game. But tell me something, Henry. Was it worth it? The revenge, I mean. I thought about Laura's face when the judge ruled in my favor, about Derek's panic when his creditors caught up with him. I remembered the satisfaction I'd felt, the vindication. But I also remembered the cost, the sleepless nights, the constant anger, the energy poured into plotting and scheming. It was satisfying, I admitted. But you know what? The real victory wasn't in destroying them. It was in taking back control of my life, in not letting their betrayal define me. Malcolm clinked his bottle against mine. Now that, he said, is something worth celebrating. Months passed, and life in our small town settled into a new rhythm. My shop was busier than ever, and I found myself hiring 2 new mechanics just to keep up with demand. It seemed that adversity, rather than breaking me, had only made me stronger. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I was tinkering with an old Mustang I'd bought as a project car, I heard the rumble of an unfamiliar engine pulling into my driveway. I wheeled myself out from under the car to see Malcolm stepping out of his sedan, a hard expression on his face. "Henry," he said, his voice serious, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag and led him inside. Malcolm rarely made house calls on weekends, and the look on his face told me this wasn't a social visit. Once we were settled in my living room, Malcolm took a deep breath. "I've got some news about Laura." I felt my jaw clench involuntarily at the mention of her name. "What about her?" Malcolm pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "One of my contacts in the city spotted her. She's not doing well, Henry." He handed me a grainy photograph. It took me a moment to recognize the woman in the image as my ex-wife. Laura, once so polished and put together, looked haggard and worn. She was exiting a rundown apartment building, her clothes wrinkled and her hair unkempt. "She's been working odd jobs," Malcolm continued. "Waitressing mostly, barely making ends meet from what I hear." I stared at the photo, a whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. Part of me felt a satisfaction. This was the price of her betrayal, after all. But another part, a part one thought I'd buried, felt a twinge of something. Not quite pity, but a recognition of how far she'd fallen. "What about Derek?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Malcolm shook his head. "No one's seen him. There are rumors, though. Some say he skipped the country to avoid his debts. Others—" He trailed off, his implication clear. I nodded, processing this information. Derek, the smooth-talking paramedic who had helped destroy my marriage, was gone. Whether he was on a beach somewhere or at the bottom of a river, I found I didn't much care. "Why are you telling me this, Mal?" I asked, handing the photo back. Malcolm leaned forward, his eyes serious. "Because I know you, Henry. You're a good man, despite everything that's happened. I wanted you to hear this from me, not through the town gossip mill." I appreciated Malcolm's honesty, but I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "A good man? After everything I did to them?" "You did what you had to do," Malcolm said firmly. "They made their choices, and now they're living with the consequences. Just like you had to live with the consequences of their betrayal." I nodded, grateful for his understanding. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of Laura's fall from grace hanging between us. Finally, Malcolm stood to leave. At the door, he turned back to me. "Henry, just don't let this consume you, all right? You've built something good here. Don't let thoughts of them drag you back down." The bell above the shop door chimed, pulling me from beneath the hood of a stubborn Ford F-150. I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag as I turned to greet the customer. "Be right with you," I called out, my eyes still on the engine. "Take your time," a warm, feminine voice replied. "I'm enjoying the view." I looked up, startled, to find a woman I didn't recognize leaning against the doorframe. She was attractive, with short dark hair and laughing eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand. "My brother Tom said you're the best mechanic in town." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "Henry Calloway. Tom's right. I am the best." I said it without arrogance, just a statement of fact. Sarah laughed, a rich, genuine sound that seemed to fill the shop. "Well, aren't you confident? I like that in a man." For a moment, I was taken aback. It had been so long since I had thought of myself as anything other than a mechanic or an ex-husband. The idea that this attractive woman might be flirting with me was unexpected. "So," I said, clearing my throat, "what seems to be the problem with your car?" As Sarah described the strange noise her engine had been making, I found myself relaxing. This was familiar territory, cars, engines, problems to be solved. But as I worked on her vehicle, I couldn't help but notice the way she watched me, the easy conversation that flowed between us. When I finished, Sarah insisted on taking me to lunch as a thank you. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Over sandwiches at the local diner, I learned that Sarah was new in town, a writer who'd moved here for the peace and quiet. She was funny, intelligent, and refreshingly direct. "So, Henry," she said as we finished our meal, "are you going to ask me out, or do I have to do everything myself?" I nearly choked on my coffee. I'm not sure that's a good idea," I stammered. Sarah's eyes softened. "Tom told me about your ex-wife," she said gently. "I'm not looking to replace her, Henry. Just thought it might be nice to have dinner with someone who appreciates a man who knows his way around an engine." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something that wasn't anger or bitterness. It was hope. "Dinner sounds nice," I heard myself say. Sarah's smile was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. Over the next few months, my life changed in ways I never could have anticipated. Sarah and I began dating, taking things slow, both of us carrying our own baggage but willing to see where this might lead. My business continued to thrive. I hired more staff, even started looking into expanding the shop. The town that had once whispered behind my back now pointed to me as an example of resilience and success. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on my porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a serious expression. "Henry," she said, "are you happy?" I thought about it, really thought about it. I thought about the man I'd been before Laura's betrayal, the man I'd become during my quest for revenge, and the man I was now. "You know what?" I said, surprised by the realization. "I am. I really am." Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with understanding and affection. As we sat there, hand in hand, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the pain, the anger. It had all shaped me, forged me into the man I was today. A man who understood the value of loyalty, of trust, of self-respect. I had lost a marriage, yes, but I had gained so much more. I had gained myself. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. A new day was ending, but I knew that tomorrow held the promise of even better things to come. I may have lost the battle for my marriage, but in the end, I had won the war for my life. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.